Hello, everybody. Welcome to the WITNG Chat Show. My name is Toyin Oladiran, founder of The Narrow Gateway. The Narrow Gateway is a fluid and ever-growing platform of creative programs, materials, and resources to trigger you and I to instinctively seek, find, and enter by what the Bible calls the narrow way that leads to life. So when we encounter life's different faces and phases, no matter what hits us, no matter what is going on around us, we are triggered to respond by asking the question, WITNG, what is the narrow gateway? What is God saying about this situation? And what will he have me do? And when we discover the narrow gateway, we align and we run with it. We enter by the narrow gateway. Now, we have a very packed show lined up today, so I would like us to get on with it. I'd first like to introduce our topic for the day. Our topic today is narrow gateway parenting in a highly sexualized world. Now, very recently, a story broke in South Africa of 3 boys aged between 12 and 14 who raped an 8-year-old girl in school. This story broke amidst a renewed movement in South Africa regarding violence against women. There had been a number of highly publicized incidences in South Africa. There had been a renewed sort of movement against this violence that we've been seeing against women. And then this happened. 3 boys aged between 12 and 14 raped an 8-year-old girl in school. Now, this issue is not new in the country. It's not something that has never happened before. In fact, it happens not just in South Africa, but in many countries around the world. It's an ongoing fierce battle in our various communities, in our various homes. And I can't help but wonder when that story broke, when people woke up to that story, about little boys raping a little girl. What happened in homes around the breakfast table? As kids were driven to school or walked to the bus stop, were there any conversations between parents and their kids about what had happened? Did any father or mother sit their own kids down and engage them on the horror that had been reported and the underlying values and social tragedy that it indicated? Did they, or I should say, did we, because I am a parent as well, did we engage our children on safety and security, respect for their own bodies, respect for the bodies of other people? We can be rest assured that the kids knew what had happened. They had heard about it, they had read about it on their phones, they'd seen it on the news, they would have heard about it on the radio. Most importantly, they would have had conversations about it with their friends on the playground. But how many of us parents actually saw fit to engage our kids, not as a once-off, but as an ongoing conversation on the values of sex, sexuality, power, and the body? How many parents actually may have gone out to work that day and expressed, together with their coworkers, expressed outrage and typed it all over Facebook about how this is unacceptable and what are we doing, etc. However, when it came to communicating what had happened with our kids, how many of us just didn't know how? We didn't know how to go about communicating this tragedy to our kids and modeling some strong messages to them surrounding this horrid event. Let's flip it a little bit. How many kids felt safe and confident to engage their parents about the matter and to ask questions, to seek a sense of direction, a sense of security, a sense of understanding about the world that they live in? I bet the kids had questions. I bet they had concerns. Some may have felt angry. Some may have been scared. There are those who might have even been amused. Yes. Others may have been completely unmoved because, maybe they have been doing this, they've been perpetrating this, or different types of similar behavior. Or maybe they have friends that do this. Maybe they receive videos on their phones of people that they know who this is being done to, or people who they know are perpetrating these types of behaviors. Perhaps some of them are victims themselves, and they have just come to accept that, well, this is just how life is. This is what life has for me. Now, today's show is not a show primarily about sexual abuse, but I believe that as we speak on this topic of narrow gateway parenting in a highly sexualized world, I do hope and I do believe that we will also start to see a pattern emerge. This pattern, I think, will be that if we as parents, Christian parents who buy into narrow gateway values, I'm talking biblical values about sexuality, if we are serious about doing life behind the narrow gateway in a highly sexualized world, if we're serious about raising our kids in the same sort of values and the same sort of line, then we need to be super intentional about wholesomely and timelessly introducing our kids to biblical values about sexuality. this, I believe, plays a critical role as they grow up. And it plays a role in among other things. It's not the only key, but it's one of the critical keys in helping them and in equipping our children to have a healthy and a wholesome relationship with love and sexuality, intimacy and power. And it definitely goes a long way to protecting our children from sexual abuse and from becoming victims or perpetrators themselves. So that's our topic, folks. WITNG, what is the narrow gateway when parenting in this highly sexualized world, where sex is either worshipped as God or tabooed as gross? What is the narrow gateway for parents when responding to the realities of unhealthy sexual affinities in this world, or the realities of sexual abuse against children in the world that we live in? Great. Now, today we have the honor of having WITNG screen shared with a guest to discuss this topic. That is Haley Walker. Welcome to WITNG, Haley.
Hi, everybody. I'm pleased to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks for being here. We're very excited to discuss this topic with you. I am going to try my best to do justice to what you're about, because I know you wear quite a few hats. Haley is a faith at home ambassador, helping families and churches work together to grow children in their Christian faith. Haley is also an evergreen parenting facilitator, providing temperament-based parent coaching. She consults as a safety policies and protocol for child care expert. She's also the chairperson of Protective Behavior Southern Africa, which is a not-for-profit organization that provides life skills programs and training for parents, caretakers, and teachers of children to help them basically to prepare their children in their care for the challenges that exist in the world. Have I captured at least some of what it is that you do, Haley?
Thank you, Toyin. I think so, but I do think my most important role is that of mom to two busy children, aged 10 and 11.
Okay, very, 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 very important role indeed. But yeah, let's go on to get you to give us the inside scoop on who you are, and maybe you might tell us more about your parenting role. Here at the WITNG chat show, we like to get up close and personal with our guests by asking them to introduce themselves with a statement of self. It's basically just the idea that as Christians, we need to know who we are, we need to know who we are in Christ, and we need to be running with it. So please, let's have it, your statement of self.
I think if I have to give a statement of self, it's that I'm a passionate follower of Christ that believes I'm called to create a safer environment for our children to grow to their God-given potential.
I love that. And this passion that you've had, just tell us a little bit about how it came about, helping children.
Yeah, I think right from early, I was in grade 11 in school and knew that I had a calling to work with children, but I've always been passionate about safety and basic rights and things like that with children. So I've been a children's pastor for nearly 20 years.
Wow.
And what I'm doing now has kind of developed out of that. And so it's been a long time coming. God's opened doorways and training and all sorts as we've gone, but always known that that's what I needed to do, was create a safe environment.
Yeah. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Let's dive right into this topic. I want to make another statement. As you can see, I feel very strongly about this. We live in a world where 1 in every 3 kids is a victim of sexual abuse. That's my understanding of the statistics. This is happening in our homes. It's happening in our schools. It's happening around us now. When that story broke about the boys who raped an 8-year-old girl, I posted a question on Facebook. I said, who do we blame now? Who do we hold responsible for what has happened? Do we blame the fathers? Are we going to say it's because of the fathers of the boys, or is it because of their mothers? Is it their teachers? Is it our leaders? Is it celebrities? Is it TV? I feel that the issues at stake here are so deep, and the crux of the problem cannot possibly lie in the hands of one group of people. It lies with all of us as a unit, as a people. You know what I mean? The perpetrators of these heinous crimes are not, they're not out there. They come from us. They're part of us. They're part of our families, our communities. So where did they get this behavior from is the question. My opinion is that it comes from a severe and ongoing breakdown of values in our societies. From time immemorial, strong and godly values have been passed on from generation to generation, primarily in the home. The Bible actually says, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he grows up, he will not depart from it. That doesn't mean that children do not have a choice when they're raised with godly values. They do, but at the very least, they've been equipped by their caregivers to make the right choices. You know what I'm saying? They've been presented with life and death, and now they can choose life, type of thing. You know, and for me, I keep saying to myself, in 20 years' time, you know, or okay, hopefully more than 20, because my daughter is not 3 yet, but in a bunch of years' time, will my daughter be trying to have the same conversations? Do you understand? Will she be worried about the same things? Do you understand? And my son, you know, will they still be battling with the same things, or is there stuff that we can do as Christians now? You know, and I do think that the answer is for parents and caregivers of children to defy the world. And the reason I say defy the world is because narrow gateway parenting and the values that we're talking about introducing are not popular values. They're not mainstream values. You know what I mean? So it will take for parents to be willing to defy the world and pass on these godly values about sex, sexuality, love, and intimacy to their kids. That's my statement. What do you think?
I think there are a couple of things. I think abuse and rape and all of those things have been happening for years, and those things haven't been spoken about. We're starting to give a voice to people where that experience has been the case.
Yeah.
But I do think we're seeing an increase of sexual violence against people, or a lack of respect for other people's bodies. But I think all round, if we look, we seem to be seeing a lack of respect for basic rules. And so how do we work with that when we're parents, when we're people in the church, when we're people in the community? You know, if I look at the fact that the stats show that between 87 and 93% of all children who are abused by someone they know and trust. Yeah. That says there's a problem within society. It's a problem within what's happening in our homes. Yeah. And so how do we change our values in what we live, how we understand children, how we respect children in the home? And it comes back down to teaching body autonomy and consent and all of those kind of things. I do think that, you know, people are sitting under a lot more pressure. And these days it's a lot more difficult. I think things like pornography have created a vicious spiral, which is creating problems for us in terms of how we teach our children about sex and sexuality, and then also how we as adults act out that sex and sexuality in our own homes and what the children are being exposed to. Yeah. So I think one of the things we've got to look at is what is happening in the homes, what is happening in the schools, what is happening on media, what are our children exposed to, because children live what they learn and they live what they see. And so if we're seeing children act out like those boys with that girl, children don't know how to do that stuff. They've seen it somewhere. So we're not protecting them from what they're seeing in the external environment.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is that, you know, you're linking sexual abuse of children to the environment that we're living in. The fact that we're in a highly sexualized world. They're exposed to this behavior within the home, outside the home. They're exposed to it all over the place. And you know, people are acting out what they see, basically.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We look at, there's very little value placed on sex and sexuality. Our teenagers are under such huge pressure to not be a virgin, to actually be sexually active. Yeah. And so what do we teach them? How are we having those conversations with them to say to them, that's not the norm. That's actually not the norm.
Yeah. I mean, interesting you say that, you know, because I don't know if the mainstream rhetoric is to say that's not the norm. The mainstream rhetoric seems to me to be saying, no, it is the norm. You're a very sexual being, which we are. God made us that way. Yes. So therefore, you should be engaging. You should be exploring. You should be, you know what I mean? But just do it, you know, but then we want to contain.
In a safe way.
You know what I mean? But
yeah, in a safe way.
You know?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I look at the international research I've been doing around this, and I do think the adults in our communities are recognizing how dangerous this is, the acting out of our children, the sexual behavior of our young people. And a lot of adults are trying to say to them, this isn't normal. You know, you don't need to sleep around. It's not what is expected of you. In fact, people are trying to push back, but our kids are hearing a very different culture through what they're seeing and being exposed to.
Yeah.
And they be given information they're not ready to get. And so they're looking for information or being given information that doesn't actually work from a value perspective.
Yeah, yeah. And it's you said earlier about the fact that what sex has been, it's not like, when we talk about this being a highly sexualized world, it's not to say that the world has never been sexualized before and it's now newly sexualized. I mean, there's a book that I read recently by Luke Wilkerson. It's called The Talk, 7 Lessons to Introduce People with Sexuality to Your Child. And it makes a point about the fact that in every single book in the Bible, sex is mentioned in one way or the other. In fact, sexual abuse is mentioned, not in every single book, but there's a strong reference to sexual activity and sexual behavior. Just for one or two examples, Tamar, who was who was raped by one of David's sons, a guy called Amnon, raped his half-sister Tamar, and then her brother ended up killing Amnon, to avenge Tamar. We've got David, who lusted after, wanted Bathsheba so much that his desire for her drove him to kill her husband. Potiphar's wife wanted Joseph so much that when he refused and when he felt he was going to keep himself pure, he ended up getting thrown in prison because she accused him of rape. Basically, she lied. So sex has been part of our world. It's been driving people's decisions. It's been driving young people, older people, since time immemorial. But it almost seems like in these times, there's something about the proliferation of it. Maybe it's the availability of it, the mindsets that go around it. I don't know, what do you think about it that makes the threat so much more real and evident now?
I think the reality is now we live in a global world. When we were growing up, and even if you look in the Bible, it was kind of village mentality. So your exposure was the people you were around. And so it was really the people down the road or on that block that lived near you that you would spend time with. Whereas our children today live in a global environment. They have access to the latest and greatest from all over the world.
Yeah.
The trends are quick. So if something happens in the US or the UK, we know about it as soon as it's happened now. So maybe when we were growing up, I know in South Africa, we often used to joke that we were 10 years behind. So whatever happened in the US, the adults had like 10 years to catch up and kind of figure out how to deal with the situation.
Yeah.
Whereas we don't see that now. Whatever's happening in the US is already happening here. Whatever games the kids are playing there, they're playing here. And so even if we look at the news and we look at the internet and what's available on the internet, if we wanted to do research, you had to ask your friend or ask an adult, or you had to go to the library to find out about something. Now our kids get onto their computer or their phone or their laptop and they quickly Google, and Google is a scary place to do sex education because you've got a lot of information out there that is misinformation. And so we're seeing our kids. I've often found kids who kind of say, well, the adults around me don't want to talk to me about this, so I'm going to go and research it myself. And then they Google, and then they end up with pornography and all sorts of other stuff. And so these poor kids aren't being given filters with which to deal with it. As an adult, we should be able to say, you know what, that stuff's not okay. What I'm seeing there is not okay. But children aren't ready for that emotionally. And so they see this, they take it as kind of, this is what's normal, and they start to act it out. I know when I worked with the teenagers, and did a workshop with the teenagers, one of the things they said is everybody is sexually active. And if I want to know how to do this, I use pornography as a way to teach me how to have sex and that kind of stuff. And that's scary. That's very scary because then we normalize abnormal sexual behavior. So I think as parents, we're way behind our children. We can't keep up with them. Technology is changing a lot quicker than we understand. And so it's kind of a scary place because a lot of parents I've come across don't know what's going on in their children's lives. They don't know what their kids are getting up to on the phones. Had a conversation just this week with a mom who often gives her phone her son to Google stuff, and she said she didn't even realize that there was some weird stuff that was coming up when he was doing these Google searches, because he didn't talk to her about it. It
Wow.
was just, there was nothing wrong, and she thought there's nothing that'll come out on that search. And so
Wow.
it's a difficult one. They're hearing the news. My
Mm,
kids immediately hearing the story about the girl who was raped in the school,
yeah.
of, is our school safe, are we safe?
Yeah.
So they are being taught stuff that we would have protected children, or we would have been protected from as children.
Yeah.
And so they're hearing stuff that is way beyond their years and being exposed to that.
Yeah. And even, linking what you said now about your kids being able to come to you and speak about it. I mean, just linking to that, how many parents do you think were able to engage their children about this, or knew how to, engage their children? Because it was all over the news. Everybody was talking about it. And
Yeah.
of course, adults will speak about it, with a lot of passion and things like that. But did parents really, drive their children to school and speak about it? Did children actually think they could speak to their parents about it? Of course, they might have spoken about it in school, but I don't know. What do you?
Yeah. My experience working with children is most of them are not comfortable speaking to their parents about it, because their parents aren't comfortable having those conversations. So often they just get brushed off, or, that's an adult conversation. It's not necessary for you to know about it. Don't worry about it. But the children do. They hear these things. They want to know. I
Yeah.
always work on when I do parenting courses, I always talk about the file, the filing cabinet. Your child is like a filing cabinet. And so we want to be the ones to open the file in the filing cabinet, because that's what establishes the values around it. But I think too often parents are kind of reneging on that, in terms of that it'll be easier if the school teaches my child, or it'll be easier if the church teaches my child about this stuff, because I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
And so they're not the ones who are opening those files. And often it's environments where we don't want somebody else opening that file.
Yeah.
And when we open that file, our child knows that they can come and talk to us about that thing, that we're not too scared of having that conversation,
Yeah.
even if it's uncomfortable for us. Nobody ever said parenting was going to be easy or comfortable.
Yeah.
And so we often get challenged beyond what we're comfortable with as parents.
Yeah.
But the reality is, if we're not opening that conversation, our children won't necessarily come and talk to us about it. And so we've got to create the opportunities for them to talk.
Yeah. So I think we can, just sort of linking to that. What we're saying is that, one, who's responsible? Who's responsible? We've spoken about parents. We've spoken about some parents feeling like, what, this, I don't really know what to say. So can the church, can the church deal with this, or can the schools deal with it? Whose role is it? Whose primary role is it, and what is the support system supposed to look like around communicating biblical and godly sexuality to children?
I think for me, the primary role lies with the parent. God made you the parent of that child. And so it's you who has the ultimate responsibility in how you raise that child, what you talk to your child about. But I do think it's a village thing. Everybody has a responsibility in a community to work with the children, to hold them accountable, to have conversations with them. I find that we've grown up in an era where parents almost feel like they're not equipped to have these conversations. They don't know what to do. And often in my work, I see that churches kind of say to parents, you don't know how to equip your child in the faith, so send them to Sunday school and we'll do that. And then the kids go to school and the teachers say, we're the specialists in education, we'll do that. You don't know what you're doing there, so let us do that. And just listen to us and do what we say. And so I find parents often shy away from having conversations because they don't know that actually they can. They're allowed to, and they should be having these conversations, and they need to equip themselves to do that. So what can we do? If we as the church or as educators, we need to go out there and educate the parents in how to have the conversations. It's not necessarily our job to have those conversations with the children, but we need to equip and support the parents. So when a minister is preaching from the pulpit, what is he teaching in the church about sex and sexuality? So that parents know what to say. What is the school teaching about sex and sexuality? I often hear schools say, we don't even want to tell the parents what we're teaching because they're going to freak out, or parents are just difficult. But how do we as parents have conversations with our children if we don't know what has already been said to our children? So I think everybody has a role to play in raising the child. I think everybody needs to be intentional around these conversations,
Yeah.
because often parents aren't confident. The number of times I have parents phone me and say, how do I have this conversation with my child?
Yeah.
How do I even talk about their body? How do I even talk about any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Because it's too scary, or nobody ever had that conversation with me. We're
Mm.
living in different times. We can't bury our head in the sand. We
Yeah.
can't just leave the book on the pillow and hope that our kids will survive. They're
Yeah.
not going to. If we're not having those conversations as parents and supporting our children and encouraging them and holding them accountable, they're
Yeah.
going to sink in the current environment.
So I remember when we were having some prior discussions, you mentioned that sometimes parents say things like culture, in our culture,
Mm.
we have these conversations, and I really liked the way you responded to that about, this whole thing of, no, not in my culture.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think for me, culture is the context you're living in at the time.
Yeah.
And so parents will often say to me, and teachers will say to me, in our culture, we can't talk about those things. In our culture, we don't do this. And I say, but your kids are growing up in a different culture, and we need to become contextualized to the culture they're in. We
Yeah.
need to have the conversations. Whether we like the fact that they're talking about these things and doing these things is not, not the point. The
Yeah.
fact is our children are being involved in that stuff, and if we don't talk about it. So I always say to them, we've got to realize our kids are in a global culture. They're not in our kind of birth culture that we're hoping. They live in a global culture where what we're seeing on TV for international stuff is
Mhm.
what's happening for our children.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, let's once again, let's get stuck into practicalities for parents. I think we've set the stage, we've set the scene. I think the way I would like us to go about this is, I would like to wear a hat where I share values that I believe in when it comes to communicating and sharing and introducing biblical sexuality to your kids. And then I will hand over to you to basically share with us, and hone in on sexual abuse specifically, and how parents can be intentional about protecting their kids from sexual abuse, or at least equipping their kids to be able to protect themselves from sexual abuse. And for parents who are interested in actual step-by-step sort of like keys, to actually making those communications with their children, I would urge you to go ahead and have a look at the book by Luke Wilkerson, which is The Talk. It's called The Talk: 7 Lessons to Introduce Your Child to Biblical Sexuality. It's a simple guide and Bible study that you can do with your kids. Each lesson takes about 15 minutes. In fact, you can literally do it as a bedtime routine with your kids. It's focused on the ages of 6 to 10, but he has also written similar books for younger kids, 3 to 5, and for older kids, 11 to 13 and 14 and onwards. Check out my website, www.thenarrowgateway.com. This is the entertainment reviews page, where I've actually done a review of that book. And when you check out the review, then you'll be able to see how you can access Luke Wilkerson's materials and things like that. Okay, so let me go ahead and share with you, with everybody watching, what I feel are the values that underpin and that parents need to think about, and need to embrace in these times if we really want to stem this tide and make a different way for our children and our children's children, so that they are not grappling with the same issues of sexuality, abuse, and brokenness in relation to love and intimacy. They're not grappling with the same issues that we did, hopefully. The first value that I would like to share is be on time. The talk, and when I'm speaking about the talk, I'm speaking about the talk where we introduce biblical sexuality to our children. It's not the talk. It's not one talk, that happens once and then that's it forever. I've spoken to my child about the birds and the bees. That's it. It is not something that suddenly happens one day when you think your child is ready, or your child is undergoing puberty, or maybe you spotted a porn mag, or your child is putting up posters of celebrities on their walls, or you find out your child has a crush on a boy or a girl or whatever. It starts when your child is young, and when your child can start to appreciate the concepts of privacy and consent and value, the concepts of love and respect. So the key is to start very young in explaining the underlying values that underpin a healthy knowledge of and relationship with sex, love, and intimacy. I don't believe that there's any such thing as too early. I don't think you harm your child by starting too early. Rather, you harm your child by leaving it till too late. So you weigh your options type of thing. If your messaging and your tone is age appropriate, then I think you're good to go. You don't have to, if you don't know what to say, you don't have to, bring everything out of you. There are resources. There are so many resources out there online that parents can lean on. For instance, Luke Wilkerson's book that I've spoken about. There's so much out there to help you. So go and get the resources and be on time in making the communication with your children. And this brings me to my next point, which is be intentional. And Haley has spoken about that already. In anytime I write or speak about life behind the narrow gateway, I speak about being intentional. It's a purposeful way of living. It's not something that happens by the way or an afterthought. It doesn't mean, though, that you have to, make an appointment and sit with your child and mark it on the calendar and say, we shall hereby now to start to talk about sex. That child is just going to be freaked out and embarrassed, But you can weave the conversation into everyday life. You know what I'm saying? Bedtime, I always find that bedtime is such a powerful time in the life of most children because their defenses are down. They're a bit sleepy. They're vulnerable. They're open to you. It's a good time to ask questions or to tell stories about yourself. It's a good time maybe when you're out, you go to a wedding or you see a pregnant lady or something like that, to speak about different values and different principles. How do you think that baby got there? You know what I'm saying? Just using everyday life to pass on a message, but you've got to do it intentionally. So you have to be sort of purposeful about it, but without freaking the child out. You know what I mean? Without making the child feel like it's a test that they're going to, have to write an exam about, sort of thing. The next value that I think is critical is relationship. This is the kind of stuff that you're not going to just introduce to a child when there's no relationship to encase the messaging. It needs to happen in the context of a wholesome, trusting, and secure relationship that you have with your child. It is through relationship that your child gets that sense of identity and that sense of worth, value, self-respect, self-confidence. These are all critical values that will shape your child's thoughts and actions when your child is faced with decisions about love and sex and intimacy. In addition to that, through your relationship with your child, you build trust. And that is critical because you can't expect your child to be comfortable to open up to you and to listen to you and share about these concepts if, as a matter of general life, they're not engaged in a purposeful relationship with you of love and intimacy. And I think, a lot of us parents, we miss it there because we want to pass on the values, but we're not, being holistic in the way we relate to our kids so that our kids actually feel that they can receive values, you understand, from us. We want to pass on those values and we try to, but there's no context of a secure relationship between parent and child within which the values can be passed on. So it ends up just going over the child's head. The child doesn't sometimes feel like he or she can trust the parent and come to them when they start getting curious or when they start to see things or stumble on things on the internet and things like that, or sometimes when bad things happen. So in order for that kind of interaction and that kind of communication to happen, relationship is key. For me, the next value that I would share is that it's critical to share God with your child. We need to share and pass on to our child a strong sense of security and worth, a strong sense of identity and love and value. But if we don't also share this concept of God and the fact that you are submitted to God, you understand, then what you end up with is a kid that is strong and confident, who is so strong and confident and has such a strong sense of self-worth that they don't see why they need to submit to this God. Do you understand? Because God comes with values that often require us to sort of put our own sense of goodness or rightness aside. You know what I mean? So if you raise a child, that is confident and has the self-worth and knows how to protect my body and all of those things, don't touch me, don't whatnot, but is not willing to submit to God, then you've got another problem on your hands, isn't it? Because that child is going to create their own sense of what is right and what is wrong. And look, this feels right. I've done the math. I have protected myself. I have done this. I've done that. And so therefore I'm good to go. And they won't want to necessarily submit themselves to the values, of the biblical values that you're trying to pass on. So introduce God to your child. You can't force God on anybody, but you can actually introduce. And then the rest lies in God's hands. And then I would also say lean on your story, which is the next value. Lean on your story. Be honest and seek to help your child learn from your mistakes. I know there are many parents who are dreading the day that they are going to, that their child is going to start asking questions, maybe putting two and two together and saying, when mama and papa got married and, and they're thinking, the math does not add up because I am so years old and it takes 9 months for a child to be born, and parents, I know people who are dreading that, and I understand that. I understand that because I'm also going to one day have to have some hard conversations with my child about mistakes I have made in the past, with my children, but I think that especially for those of us who God has taken through a process and delivered us out of a certain lifestyle, there's power in that story. There's power in that testimony. We were not always on the straight and narrow, so we don't have to pretend. God knows all about it. We don't have to pretend and hide it from our child. We can be open, but wisely use our testimony and the work that God has done in our lives and continues to do in our lives as a tool to help our kids understand that this is how God works. This is how life works. This is how things can go bad. This is how things can turn around. This is how merciful God is, choose life type of thing. So I believe there's power in your testimony. The sixth value I want to pass on is your own relationships. Your own relationships as a parent. Sexuality in your own relationships. Parents struggle to pass on biblical values about sexuality because they themselves are not necessarily living true to biblical values about sexuality. So let's say a child is growing up in a home where, when I say sexuality, I'm also talking about love and intimacy, right? So let's say a child is growing up in a home where the parents are always fighting and they disrespectful to one another. There's always a power play, they're always using, they're playing games, mind games and things like that with one another. There's infidelity possibly, or just plain old lack of love, lack of friendship, So the child has no godly example of stable and secure love, stable and secure intimacy, of passion between two people that actually want to be together and play together and clearly want to be alone together, within the context of marriage, If a child does not have that example of partnership and equality and respect for one another and one another's bodies, if they don't know what it's like for a man to honor a woman's body or for a woman to have the power to say no without being victimized, then if that's a child's first exposure in their home, then how are they going to fare outside? When they get outside, it doesn't mean that they're definitely going to have a bad relationship with sex or love or intimacy, but it means now they're going to have to find other examples, or they will fall into the same patterns. You find some kids who have to watch their mothers stay in abusive relationships and continue to be abused and overpowered. Now, when a child grows up in that environment, how do we convince that child that, no, these values that I'm trying to pass on to you, that's what you should follow? We as parents need to model the values that we are trying to pass on to our kids. And speaking again of modeling values, we also need to model values in our lifestyles. So there's the kind of relationships we have, and then there's also the lifestyle that we have. What do we watch on TV? And we've spoken about that earlier. What kind of music do we listen to? What kind of music videos do we listen to? What kind of language do we use in the house? What kind of people do we allow to come into their house? What kind of people do we leave our children with? If you're a single parent, what's your dating life like? Because of course you will date, but how do you conduct yourself in your dating relationship? What's your child watching? Passing down biblical values about anything, especially sexuality, it has to be modeled. It can't just be taught. Now, this is a tall order, and we're not shying away from it, because a parent cannot insist on his or her right to live in a certain way, but then expect the child to do things differently. You know what I mean? It won't really work. So children learn from what they see their parents doing. So we as parents, it means that we also have to be intentional about the choices that we make. And then the very last value that I'd like to share with everybody watching is don't give up. Don't give up. I always say this in almost any devotional that I put out there or any piece that I write. I say this: don't give up. I am the first one to know how demotivating it can be when you make a commitment at the beginning of the day. I'm going to do this, and by 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, you've already messed up, and you're just like, you know what? Let me just give up. The devil tells you just give up. You know what? Don't even bother. But I really believe the Bible says a righteous man falls and gets up. You keep on getting up. None of us are perfect. None of us is going to get all of these things right the first time. But if we stick our hands in God's hands and we hold on to him and we genuinely surrender and work with him and walk with him, he carries us through. It's by his grace. These children are his. He just gave them to us to steward them for a time. So even when we mess up, or even if we've already messed up, I believe that God is able to still have mercy and to steer our kids in the right way. He's able to help them navigate life in this highly sexualized world. Even if we make mistakes, he will journey with them to redeem them, just like he did for us, just like he did for me, just like he did for you. So don't give up. Be intentional. Be purposeful. Make purposeful choices, and then run with it, trusting God to be the one who blesses your effort.